Fear. It's a really powerful force that holds us back. It prevents us from reaching our full potential and hinders our personal growth. In this video, I'm going to talk about how fear prevents you from evolving. So let's dive right into it. How do you spell fear? F-E-A-R. Almost all fear is fantasized experiences appearing real. This is a really useful way to remember what we're doing to ourselves when we're afraid. We create these ideas about certain things, and that's what really prevents us from experiencing life to its full potential. And how are you scaring yourself? How are you scaring yourself? What negative outcome are you imagining? I want you to be thinking of an example of something that frightens you. Think of it something that frightens you. Maybe meeting someone, maybe meeting a girl frightens you. And so you might think of yourself, I'm afraid of meeting new people because they might reject me. Or I'm afraid of meeting a woman because I'm not good enough, for example. So that fear is created by the thoughts that you have around meeting a new person. Now, is it real? Is it a fantasized experience that you have that might seem real? Definitely, when you are thinking about meeting somebody, for example, you might think of all the negative things that could possibly happen, and that is what is creating the fear within you. It's something that's imaginary that you think is real, but in fact, it's not real because you have created it in your mind. Now, if you have experienced rejection before, so that you know it's quite possible that it could happen, you can get rejected. Maybe the woman will laugh at you and will say, no way. And this has happened to you before. You may want to ask yourself, how can I change that? How can I change that? So sometimes the fear is definitely justified. And of course, with a coach, you could create a plan to help you get back on track, to help you reduce or even eliminate that fear so that you're back on track and that you start asking women to start dating again. Now, that's just an example of a fear. Other people might have fears of presenting in front of a group. They may have fears of being rejected. You might experience fears of height, for example. There's a lot of different types of fears. What I want to talk about now is the language that we might use around fear. Almost all words that end with ed, for example, trapped, overwhelmed, confused, they describe conditions about ourselves which we are actually doing to ourselves, things which we have control over and can stop. And using ed words robs us from our power and makes feelings and circumstances seem to victimize us. When we change those ed words to words ending in ing, we take charge of our feelings and circumstances. And I'll give you a few examples. I feel scared when I approach a woman. So, scared. I am scaring myself when I approach a woman. I feel trapped. I am trapping myself by thinking and believing that I can't approach a woman to date, for example. I feel depressed. Well, I'm depressing myself by not taking chances to ask women to date. So these are examples. If you change the word, if you go from example, scared to I am scaring myself, or I feel depressed to I am depressing myself. That gives you more power to change it. It gives you the idea that you can actually change it. So, for example, I want to ask Sally out for a date. And I scare myself by imagining that Sally will refuse my date. Right? So the keywords are I scare myself by imagining. I scare myself by imagining. A fear is self-created by imagining some negative outcome in the future. And so can you see that you're the one that's creating the fear? You're the one that's creating the fear. And I'll give you another example. I want to go skydiving. And I scare myself by imagining that I'm going to die. Can you see how I am the one that's creating this fear by imagining death when I'm skydiving, for example? So here's another example. I want to leave my job, but I'm imagining the worst. I scare myself by imagining that I won't find another job. So I want to leave my job, and I scare myself by imagining that I won't find another opportunity. So you could see how this is something that I've created myself. It's not something that is real. It is something that has been dependent on an imaginary situation. So let's go back to that definition of what fear is. Fear is an imagined fantasy that appears real. So it's a fantasized experience appearing real. Think about that and think about how now you could change your experience so that it helps you to remove the fear and maybe to not even experience fear at all. So in order to practice this, this is what I'm going to challenge you to do. I'm going to challenge you to write a list of things that you're afraid of doing. So start with that. What are some of the things that you're afraid of doing? And you could, you're afraid of asking your boss for a raise. You're afraid of asking so-and-so for a date. You're afraid of. So what are some of the things that you're afraid of doing? That's the first thing I want you to think of. All right, now I want you to go through each of those items and say, and I scare myself by imagining. And of course, you complete the blank. I scare myself by imagining. So I'm afraid to ask Sally out, and I scare myself by imagining that she is going to reject me. All right, now I want you to reframe this. This is the last thing I do want you to do. You're going to fill in the blanks, and I'll add them here in our video. I'm afraid to, and I'd really like to, and I scare myself by imagining if I did. So I'm afraid to ask Sally out. I'd really like to ask Sally out, and I scare myself by imagining that she's going to say no if I did. Here's another example. I'm afraid to ask for a raise. I'd really like to ask for a raise, and I scare myself by imagining that I won't get a raise if I did. Or I scare myself by imagining that my boss is going to laugh at me if I did. Well, that's what I want you to work on. I want you to work on listing the things you're afraid to do, what you'd like to do, and how you scare yourself by imagining what would happen if you did. And of course, if you want to talk more about it, please send me an email at backinthegrooveagain@gmail.com. Take care now.